KCI Kindled, creating space for meaningful dialogue, a podcast brought to you by Kahnawake Collective Impact. The goal of this podcast is to open up a safe space for community members to have conversations about current social issues, both intercommunity and global issues, culture and heritage, and language. This space encourages respectful expression of different opinions and perspectives. The opinions and perspectives expressed belong to the guests of the show and do not represent the views of Kahnawake Collective Impact, or KSCS Kahnawake. This episode's discussion contains sensitive subject matter. Please listen with discretion.
Have you ever been gaming or working online classes and your internet service constantly gets interrupted? First Nations Fiber is about to ensure that just won't happen again. Get ready for high speed at a new level. Click on fnfiber.com and sign up today. First Nations Fiber, empowering people through connectivity.
Hey everybody, welcome back. You're listening to KCI Kindled, creating space for meaningful conversation. This is your host, Karina Peterson, and we are doing the Men's Health series. This is episode 6, actually. It's kind of awesome that it's been consistently going forward since November, so that's pretty cool. I know that there's been some space and time in between each episode, but we're doing that thoughtfully because it's one a week or one every 2 weeks it's not possible for a lot of our schedules, but it also gives people time to listen to the episode and digest it a little bit before we jump into the next one. So I just want to introduce our guests on the show today. We'll start with you.
Hello, Brent.
And we have...
I'm Noah.
And Noah. Noah, welcome back.
Thank you.
So we're going to get started with just a little check-in. How are you guys doing?
Let's
start
first.
with Brent.
I'm interesting. I'm feeling a little bit like there's like some nervousness here, and it's interesting. You know, we're a bit more intimate today, and I don't know if it's sort of the sense of like you're going to be more on the spot kind of thing, but or you know this theme. There's anyways a mix of things. I've had a really relaxing day up until now. Actually, took a lot of flex time this morning, so something about what's going on right now has got the chest getting a bit tense. Yeah.
The nervous system's activated.
Yes.
I feel pretty similarly, honestly. I think, it just being the two of us, there's not a lot of space to hide. It's a pretty vulnerable topic. So I think definitely feeling a bit of that tension too.
I can agree with you there because usually we have David in the middle here and some Cody next to me and John over there in the corner. We have like 8,000 people trying to hop on, but like
grabbing the mic. Yeah.
Again, it's just a really busy time of year, right? And it's kind of rough to get everyone on the same schedule. And as much as people want to be here, it's a time of year. So, I mean, like, we can do it.
Yes.
Also, I'm feeling a little bit anxious, I guess, too, because I'm the host and now I probably have to add more to the conversation as well. So we're all feeling a little bit exposed, I guess, today.
Yes.
Intimate is a good word, too.
Yeah.
It'll be good, though. So just to recap, a little recap of the last episode, we started to talk about violence. It's sort of been a recurring issue since we started the Men's Health series. Talk a lot about vulnerability. That's another topic that keeps popping up. We talk about relationships. All these things, they're all connected and they're probably going to continue to come up in every single episode. But the next few episodes are going to be specifically on the topic of violence, just because every time we have a meeting, that topic just explodes. Like I was just explaining to you guys that the last meeting we have like a whole 3-page document just on different subjects of violence that we want to talk about. And then today's session is going to talk about literally just the first 2 points in that document. So it's a pretty big subject matter with lots and lots and lots of different material to talk about here. The last episode, we sort of explored it. We talked about it, maybe some of our own personal definitions of what violence is. We talked about how there's just from a different lens and not just necessarily the negative connotations of what violence is, but we questioned it like, is it always bad? In cases of survival, in cases of circumstances where your personal safety is at risk, like in those types of cases, is it okay to be violent? We talked about war. We talked about all different types of things in that episode, really just hashing out and exploring all different perspectives of it. So we also talked about how men seem to have like a bit of a shorter fuse when it comes to aggression and violence. And we discussed that a little bit. I'm wondering, Brent, if you could like remember or recall any of the things that we were talking about there.
I mean, it's
You're on the spot.
Oh, I'm
Pressure.
I do remember. That was a closed question. Yes, to your question.
I can accept a closed answer. Yes, he remembers. Can you can you talk more about that?
Well, I mean, we were talking about the definition part, and I think in that last episode we left there. I was driving away with David, and we were both having the conversation about, like, what do you think about some of the ways that we were speaking about the acceptable bits and the bits that are a bit less acceptable? And we were both like, well, maybe we're not talking about the same things when we're using the sort of broad term or whatever. And so just now we were talking about the difference between assertiveness and aggression just before airing, and I did do a quick like Wikipedia search. I was like, well, what does Wikipedia say? I'm no expert on this. And it's interesting how assertiveness is in the definition. It basically is like this attitude that avoids conflict, but there is this honesty and this being direct, but avoiding conflict. Whereas aggression in the definition, aggression is sort of seeking the conflict and something that is related to causing harm. And so it just feels like there's some nuances there to be sensitive to when we're talking about violence as a large thing, and when we want to sort of be in the gray zones of like when is it actually skillful to show assertiveness, let's say, versus when is it harmful and toxic even. Yeah,
that's interesting, because like we're just going to jump right into it. The terminology bullet on the paper is just the terminology of it, right? Like we have violence as this like umbrella term for it, and it neither is or is not. It just exists, and then we kind of put our own connotations to it, right? And then there's aggression, which he said is like sort of meant to cause harm. And like I didn't know that about assertiveness, is that it's actually conflict avoidant. But I could see that now. And we were talking about like, for instance, in the case of the example at the meeting was like a woman going into a job interview, and she was like assertive. Well, someone had said aggressive, and then it was corrected to be like, well, no, not aggressive, it's assertive. She went in there with a mission. She got her point across. She didn't let anyone push her around, for example. So it's like, it's assertive. And like, that makes sense because you're trying to avoid the conflict and you're not trying to harm anyone that way.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it speaks to the perception too for people of, in that case, it's like this woman being assertive maybe was perceived as aggressive. And then on the flip side, I've heard a lot of, myself or the men that I've worked with saying that being assertive feels like being passive, that
okay.
It's sort of on that other end of that.
When I was like studying education, there's a bunch of other terms that are tossed around too in terms of parenting, where you have like the authoritarian parent, the authoritative parent, and then permissive parent. And like, that's all along the lines of the same terminology too, right? Like authoritarian is like a dictator. Authoritative is like you're being more assertive, like you're setting boundaries and strict rules, but without the conflict part. You're trying not to be conflictual. I don't know if that's a word.
Why not?
Yeah.
It is now. I coined it. But it's perception. It's all perception again. And Howie, she's another woman that was at the meeting with us. She was like, it's also that there's a sociological part to it, because women who do tend to be more assertive or show their stronger emotions are looked at as aggressive and violent. And it's interesting that the flip side, that men who are more assertive feel like it's passive. It's interesting.
Yeah. I appreciate that we can speak about the perception of it, because it feels like none of us are like the specialists that have coined the right, quote unquote, terms. In my mind, I'm thinking about the word forceful, and I'm like, even that feel like there's a feeling to it. And it's like, is that really when I'm saying someone is forceful? Like, I can think of forcing someone down or something like that. And again, it sort of comes back around to something that feels violent and aggressive. And so there's a sense that we can easily get lost in these,
because
in
we could
the
flip
word.
it and be like, this person was forceful in standing up in their positions, and it's not a bad thing. They're just standing their ground.
Right.
So it's just, I wonder what takes us to like the doom and gloom right away with these words.
Or two, for someone who's never stood up for themselves before, and they're going to be assertive in that way and say, like, this is my boundary, that's probably going to feel really aggressive for them. That might look aggressive to other people who've never seen this person speak up for themselves or not be a doormat before. It's hard. Like, where's that line? And I think, like, you all talked about in the last episode around, these contexts where that violence is appropriate, where that aggression is appropriate. It's like, how do we, hold space for that and figure out where that line is of when that's called.
Right. And this reminds me of just the other day, there was something that came through email about anger management. And I sort of had I let myself go off a little bit.
You had a moment.
I had a little moment. Thank you. Just what turns me off of that kind of thing. It's like your anger is seen, it's seen as something that's not good, and so it feels like we're talking about aggression and assertion, and these things can probably fall in the same family of this basic or primary emotion of anger, which is not in and of itself bad, right? And yet, like, when we're just talking about being angry, like, I think for the most part, people don't hear that as just, oh, that's just okay, it's not the same, it's not received the same way as saying I feel happy or I feel sad or or whatever, any other emotion, it's not received in the same way. Anger has this charge to it, and it feels like a part of that is it has to do with perception, but that's been conditioned. There's a conditioning around it. There's this fear that if anger like is allowed any room, then it's like automatically going to turn into something. It's automatically going to turn into something bad. And so I wonder how that has an influence on these things that we're trying to like clarify.
That's true. And even just saying the word anger, I'm already thinking of the color red. I'm thinking of like all these really like the imagery around the word being angry. If I get angry or upset, like it's the end of the world. Everybody hates me. Like it's a pretty triggering, I don't even want to say word, but like feeling for a lot of people. It triggers a lot of people. But I guess because it's experience, right? Like if someone is angry, it's usually some kind of traumatic experience that goes along with it. It's like nobody likes to be yelled at, or maybe the fight got really out of hand, but that just comes down to expressing it. But even expressing it doesn't seem to be okay.
It's like there's, only acceptable ways to really express that. Like I remember being, when I was really young, I was a very sensitive kid. And when I'd get upset or angry, I would cry. And that was something that was so embarrassing and so shameful. And I just remember like kind of stuffing that down and being like, okay, I have to make sure I don't cry when I'm angry, but I can, yell, I can break something, I can show it in this more like masculine way, but I can't cry because that's embarrassing. And, when I speak with people about the way that anger feels and looks, and when I think about even for myself, when it comes up, it's like, it's that overpowering aspect that I think is so scary to people, where they're almost like, okay, I can't feel this at all, because once I start feeling it, it's like that hot rage that you feel in your chest that, it's so funny thinking about men in short fuses. It's like some of the women in my life I've talked to, obviously they feel angry, but there's this certain kind of rage that I've only ever really heard about other men talking about, where it's almost scary when it happens. And you're like, there can be that shame around that, around like, why do I feel this rage so intensely? Like, this isn't who I am. And there's almost that temptation to want to run from it and feel like, okay, if I let any part of this out, then it's going to control me.
Yeah, it feels like there's something sort of demonized about that. And when you're talking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, all these things that show up when you're angry, and that even the fantasy part, like images that might show up that are just like super violent, and all of that stuff. Like, I don't want anyone to know. I don't want anyone to know that that's the things that are showing up. And it's not like I'm enjoying them, like sort of help like creating them in my mind. They're just there, there is this sense, like you're saying, that it sort of feels like it could very easily become reality, and there's something about that I think is a bit scary and makes it so that it feels like a very fragile kind of place to be. But I do wonder about my own education and experiences that I've had with anger, sort of like you're saying, like the experiences that I grew up with anger was that there was always like violence associated to it. And I think that's probably a part of my programming when I'm having these like, images in my mind, or these like this like want to explode kind of thing. Well, a part of me probably believes that that's what's going to happen if you give space to this,
Yeah, it's like we're programmed to associate all those angry feelings with like the negative, violent expression of it. But I have to say that there's like a gender difference here because I'm a woman. Like whenever I get angry, it's not. I have a lot of patience, a lot of patience. But when I lose it, it's gone. Like the control is just gone. But I have to say, like on a regular day to day, if I'm angry about something, I've been socially conditioned that it's not okay for me as a woman to be angry. It's okay for me to be emotional, but to like to be angry, it's like I'm labeled as like a super hostile person if I'm ever angry, like for myself. So I can only speak for myself, but this is my experience. But I feel like I don't have the space to even be angry a lot of the times. So like if I cry, if I'm angry, that it's looked at more like normal, I guess, because women cry. It's okay because girls cry. And it's so even as like a woman, I can't say that I've learned. I can only speak for myself again. I can't say that I've learned healthy ways to express it either. I just remember like because I can't express it, I kept a diary since I was 10 years old, and I was like haphazardly scribbling all the things I'm angry about, and then I would feel guilty about it, and I would tear it out of my diary and destroy it because like God forbid I allow myself to have those angry feelings. I was made to feel bad about being angry in cases where I had every right to be angry, So it's a different experience, I guess, for us. We have to hold on to it. We always have an option to destroy things and throw things around. I had some pretty big fights with my brothers growing up. but like it's a different experience from what I'm understanding.
Yeah, it feels like it's like these polarities, it's you're speaking about sort of the suppression of it, mm-hmm. and then on the other side is like the complete loss of control, where it leads to harm and where it leads to outbursts and things like that. And like just hearing you speak, Karina, there's this sadness. Like we have just, as a society, we haven't learned to be angry in a skillful way, and I think of anger, and you use the word control, and I think of anger often as pointing to experiences where something needs to be different, right? And anger is letting me know that, like this isn't quite right. And that does speak to my capacity or incapacity to control a certain situation or parts of or elements of a situation. And it's just like those places are like fundamentally hard places to be in. Like when we have been trained to be in control, when we're experiencing anger, it's really letting us know that you are not in control here. There are things going on around you that you don't want happening, and you don't have the control over them. And it's meant to direct us to like take care of that. But it just feels like such a complex place to be in, that we haven't quite been educated. This feels like a wrong word, feels too heady, but anyways, we haven't been like we haven't gotten necessarily the help to like how do I be in that place? How do I be in that place where I don't have control and it feels bad?
That impulse is to just run from it or make it stop, or I want to get it out. There's that cathartic sort of like I just want to explode on something. and release it instead of, I don't want to look inward. I want to just get it outward. And for me, it feels so scary to look into that. I feel like, especially even trying to find those, what are the emotions underneath, what's going on underneath that anger, which, so far I, do a lot of emotion regulation with people that I work with. And it's the thing that I hate doing the most with myself. I hate, when I'm upset at my partner, I don't want to look at what's inside because I'm so afraid that if I look underneath that anger, it's just going to be like a black hole question mark that I'm not going to be able to even identify what I'm feeling, because I wasn't taught how to name my feelings. I don't know what that is. Like that's even, I feel like I'm still learning that so much, even as someone who like is a helper and should know how to do this. It's so much harder to look into your own abyss and then try to even describe what you're feeling under that.
I like what you were saying, Brent, about how anger it's a tool, right? We're equipped with all emotions are tools to be able to help us like get through daily life. And there's also like physiological things that happen to our bodies, like physically when we're angry, like the heart rate starts to rise, our muscles tense up. We get like, it's stress, right? So the cortisol hormone's activated. There's all these things that are happening physically in our body. And it's like, it's a trigger, right? It's nervous system response, fight, flight, freeze, all those types of things. So it's like, it's alerting our body that there's something that we're not in agreement with, or there's something wrong, or some way to keep us safe somehow, right? So I like that just by having this conversation, we're sort of, by exploring the terminology of it, we're kind of taking that negative stigma away from being angry. But it's still so hard, right, to separate it from that because of experience and everything else. But if we were to look at it in a way is that it's trying to help us, that would change a lot of things for a lot of people, I think.
Right. And I just my mind often goes to, and so it's going there now, like sort of comparing, like when I'm sad, it doesn't feel good either. And there is also physiological response there. And those things are not comfortable. And it's similar in a similar way. When I'm angry, it's not comfortable. It doesn't feel good to have those things that you're speaking about happen, have all that tension and have all that energy that is really like, it feels like it's just bringing me to do something now. And it's just, it just feels so interesting to me how like that energy isn't one that brings you to go internal, it is really getting you ready external. to do something, make something happen right now.
Because it's physical also. Yeah. It's not just emotions, it's physical. Mm-hmm. So there's something that I learned recently about the cortisol thing. We recently had like a workshop about stress management. We could all use a little bit of that, right? But they talked a lot about this cortisol hormone. And I mean, I may be wrong, but my memory is recollecting that this hormone, the stress hormone, is meant to help your body survive. So the cortisol is what triggers the fight, flight, or freeze response in cases of survival. So when we're stressed, our body doesn't typically know the difference between like, oh no, there's a Tyrannosaurus Rex coming to eat us versus like, I'm having an argument with my partner. Like it's stress is stress, and our bodies react the same way to it. So like this cortisol it's like an energy, a zap of energy, and it's meant to be released to help you survive. And it seems like it ties in with like the anger thing, right? Because it's physiological. You're getting this zap of energy that needs to be released. So like the short fuse discussion that we were having, how do we release that without pure chaos and flipping tables and busting up walls and each other? And like, how do we do that?
I thought even just that sort of first step of understanding the whole process when I'm getting angry, when I'm getting activated, being able to even recognize what's happening in my body, like slowing it down. Cause it feels so powerless when you're all of a sudden you're activated, you're angry, and you're like, this came out of nowhere and now I'm exploding. And just even learning how to notice, okay, what are those signs that my body's sending when I'm starting to get angry, when I'm starting to get, those signals setting off that cortisol flooding, like is my heart rate going up? Are my hands sweating? Am I twitching a bit? Are my thoughts racing? Because I find even just knowing, okay, this is what's happening to me right now, it helps with that feeling of that powerlessness. Like, because that was something for me, like I used to have very bad road rage, and it felt so, I felt so powerless, because I was like, this is, it's embarrassing. It's scary. Like, I don't want to be screaming at someone who cut me off. That I don't want to give that person that much power. And even just being able to recognize now when I'm on the road and, I feel that heat starting, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to like do a box breathing exercise and calm myself down. And I don't know, it's hard, because I don't want to say like, oh, I have control over my emotions, because I know as a good social worker, that's not how emotions work. But I also want control over my emotions. I'm holding that truth.
Maybe it's like control over behavior, and not so much.
Yeah.
I still want to control them.
I know. I wish we could just turn them on and turn them off and be a bunch of apathetic souls just like walking around.
I just want to flip a switch and be like, hey, I'm chill now. Like,
I think there's medication for that. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Can we take that part out? Oh man,
there's ads all over for that. So don't worry. You aren't the first to say that.
Yeah.
Okay,
but it's good. Like what you're saying, Noah, just makes me think again about the signals, and again, that's where I feel like there's something of the way conditioning sort of went awry. Like if this at an evolutionary level, right? Like the body doing what it does is meant to signal my attention towards something, right? Like you use the Tyrannosaurus, so that's like, this sort of typical sort of, like, oh, there's like something big like that you need to watch out for, because it could be life or death, which obviously doesn't happen as much now. But the thing is, it's still a signal, right? Mm-hmm. There may not have been anything behind the bush. And so there's something there to consider, is that it's getting the system ready. But then if you like, what walks out of the bush is like a little chicken or something like that, whatever existed that was small back in those days. Whatever, like then you wouldn't like, go and grab the chicken and like tear it apart kind of thing. It would be like, oh, the system calms down again, and it's okay. You don't need to use that energy, right? And so there's something where I'm saying the conditioning has gone awry. There's something about like there's no more capacity to be with that. It's like, doesn't matter what it is, I'm going off. And there's not even any time to consider like, is it a chicken or is it something that's gonna like tear me apart? It's like you're already gone, and that's the short fuse bit. And it's like, but so what isn't working here, because this system is a system and it's meant to do something, but how is it that it can just so easily lead to the place where you would be in the reaction mode and start those behaviors or whatever, but they're not even actually necessary, because there is nothing that is, that's gonna tear you apart. That bit there, so something, what you're talking about, the awareness, no, I really feel like that's a big part of it. It's like, can we understand that this is telling us something is going on? That's what it is doing. It's telling us something is going on. And if we can orient to that something, then already there's something that's going to be able to be like, ooh, okay. Oh no, it's just my partner.
Yeah,
like,
it's not a T-Rex. It's not a T-Rex. Just feels like one.
I think that the part that we're missing is that part to come down and to lower the levels in our nervous system. Mm-hmm. We don't have that capacity anymore.
Yeah,
there's like the emotional regulation part is what's missing. Yeah. Because like we're gonna have say a fight with our partner, but then we leave our house and then a thunderstorm hits and everything gets ruined, and then you jump in your car and you're out of gas, and then you get to work super late and your boss is yelling at you. So then it's like the stress never stops. So there's no point in time where people can come back down.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I'm like, how many of us wake up, roll over, and immediately open our phones and just get mad at something? For like, I know I do that all the time. Yeah.
I just get mad at the alarm from ringing. Like,
I'm mad at the alarm. I'm mad at something on Twitter. I get on the road. I'm mad at the highway. I get to work. I'm mad. Like it's and we're living in this like, capitalistic society that right now that requires us to run ourselves into the ground in like a cost of living crisis. Everything's expensive. And it's just how many of us have any time to come back down and to feel any stillness or peace? Like that's, if we really think about it, it's like, am I making that time? Can I even make that time? Like, where would I find that pause?
I have a story. When I was an educator, I say this every episode probably, but I learned the most about people when I was working at the daycare. So 18-month-olds up to 5. The really little babies. And I used to have this kid who was like a bomb ticking. Any little thing would just be like explosion, like big display of emotions. Sometimes something is thrown. Sometimes it's just stomping. Sometimes it's just a big tantrum and he's throwing himself on the floor. And like there's one, it's just about giving them time and space, right? Like you're also naming feelings for them. You're doing all these things. So it's like there's a few times where I had to pull this kid on the side and be like, you're okay, let's go. Let's go out into the hallway, for example. So right there, I'm giving him the space and protecting all the rest of the children so they don't have to go through that. And then I would just let him throw his tantrum on the floor. Like he needs to get that out. You cannot talk to a kid. You're not going to rationalize logically, calm down a kid when they're like that. So when you see them start to like loosen up a bit and they're slowing down and they're not like crying or screaming so much or whatever, then you can like, you're with them the whole time. You're not just like scrolling your phone while they're like rolling around on the ground. Like you're with them. You're like, okay, you're just be careful. Like you're with them. You're on the floor. Your hands are open for them. You're ready to receive them. You're not just like absentmindedly letting them scream. Like that's ridiculous. But like once they're calmed down, I would take this kid and he'd likely come and like sit in my lap or something like that. And I'm like, you're angry, you're upset. I could see that. Like you're whatever, just telling him like his face is angry. He's stomping his feet. He's doing whatever. I would name the action and be like, you're angry. Okay. But, pushing that kid in there is not okay. Or throwing your lunch bag across the room is not okay. In some instances, with some kids, throwing a chair at another person is not okay. Like, it's big feelings I'm talking about. Like, we would, as educators, sometimes have to protect ourselves from these little kids, like, just because they're little people with big feelings and they can't control their behavior like adults can most of the time. But with this specific kid, after a while, I'm like trying to think, like, what could I do? What can we do to help this kid? And I was like, I came up with a plan for this kid where we did like kind of start a journal for him to be like, every time you're feeling this or you're starting to feel it, or like you could feel your heart beating a little quicker, like in like little kid words. We're like, go get this journal. You could leave circle. You could leave whatever activity we're doing. Just go. We know what you're doing. One of us will go meet you at the table and we'll be there with you. We'll write it out what you're feeling. So he would literally do that 18,000 times a day, just running to the corner to grab his journal. He'd scribble something. He'd draw a person. He like whatever, right? And then he would be like, okay, well, tell me about your picture. And then he would say whatever it is he wanted to say about the photo and we'd write it in words for him. That's funny. There's this little girl once, she would not, for whatever reason, stop saying the word donkey. It was the word of the day for her. Donkey this, donkey that. You're a donkey. Everyone's a donkey. And it was pissing him off. They're 3 and 4 years old, but it's pissing him off so bad that he like got up, ran and got his journal, drew her as a donkey. And like, it was all like scribbly and haphazard because it's angry feelings on paper. And then he goes, now she's a donkey. And that was it. And it like, eventually it totally stopped his tantrums. He stopped the tantrums and he even went to use that journal less and less throughout the year, where it went from maybe 18 times a day down to 10, down to maybe 3, down to almost none. So it was like amazing for this one kid to be able to be given a tool to get his feelings out and to be shown like that his feeling was not bad to have. It's just that there's appropriate ways to show it.
I feel like saying that my sense is that it's not the tool. Like it sounds like it worked right? But what I'm hearing more, and every time you tell stories like this, I feel like to me, it's pointing to the same thing, to your capacity to care for this child and his complexity, right? Whereas many adult figures don't have that kind of kind of patience and space, right? And they would be like, no, you cannot be like this, and it would lead to separation, like go over there,
go to timeout until
but you're
done.
alone.
Yeah.
Whereas you're saying he's separating, but then you're coming and you're like, what's going on here? And you're looking at. So it's interesting how what you're saying is, to me, seems exactly like what is needed, right? There needs to be a care for this emotion. And so here it is being provided, right? There's a care that stays close, but it makes me think of like when you're, so you grow, you've become, bigger, perhaps, you're like more intimidating than when you're a child, muscles grow, the man's body, is takes whatever its proportions are. And the anger is coming out when you're with your partner, let's say, and yet there's something there that needs care for, right? But if the anger is being directed towards your partner, that's not going to be the person that's going to be like, it's okay, let's stay with this or whatever. Like, that's not what's going on. There's so much fear around the angry man that there is none of that. There's no space for that. And so it feels so interesting to put those things together, like in terms of what do we need when we're angry. Often there is that relational need. There is a need to be close, and it just so happens that the ways that these outbursts sort of come out would point towards the opposite, as though it's not a need to be close and be relational and have care and connection. You're yelling at someone and you're being aggressive and hurting that other being, when probably at the base of that there's a part of you that feels very vulnerable about the disconnect between you and that other person.
I think in some kind of like backwards roundabout, beating around the bush, taking the whole walk around the town way. That's what I was like trying to say, is that like just giving this kid some time to feel and like validating that like, yeah, you're angry and that's okay. And just like giving him that time to like maybe calm his nervous system down, give him the tools to be able to self-regulate. And again, that's what we're missing, right? We don't have the time or the patience for people, or even the capacity to like help people to regulate themselves because we're so dysregulated.
To hold space for that. Like, I think, what you were saying, Brent, about the needing that connection. It's like, it's so interesting because I think about that and my first reaction is like, oh, that's so embarrassing that I want connection when I'm angry. I think there's at least for me, there's still some, like, it's the shame around that. Like, it feels so embarrassing. Like, oh, like I'm a toddler throwing a tantrum when all I really want is a hug. And it's, are we ready to hold space for that? Are we ready to look at ourselves and know that we need that and express that? It's like, why is that so embarrassing? Why is that so gross? I don't know.
Vulnerability.
Yeah, are we back there again?
It's every time. It's back to that first episode all the time.
It's under everything.
I swear we didn't have it on the bullets. It was not meant to show up.
No, but it always does, right? It always does.
Yeah, it's making me think of the Be a Man, which sort of the symbolism of that doesn't immediately go to being close to someone else. Sort of feels like being alone on top of something strong, autonomous.
Well, it kind of we naturally just walked right into like that next bullet on the paper here about like, I don't know, I guess like roles and responsibilities, parenting, different things like that, because I seen this image once of like how our traditional society works here in Ganawage with Kanien'kehá:ka people. It's like the children, culture and traditions are at the center. Children are just around it. Moms, dudas, aunts and aunts. And then the men are on the outside, like protecting everyone on the inside. And I'm looking at it and I get how it works. It's like a dynamic relationship of how it works. It was specifically a diagram to represent the trauma with residential schools and how the government, that's how they infiltrated the systems. What do they start with? Culture and traditions, they took it away. What's next? Children, they took their children away. So then moms, uncles, aunts, everybody are just they're lost without the center fire burning. So it made me just really sad though, I remember because they made us do this in a physical setting. Like some of us were kids, some of us were this, and then they literally took people out of this circle. And it was like impactful. Everyone's crying.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah, the imagery was insane, but I just remember thinking like there's no one standing behind these men because they're all standing on the outside looking in and there's nobody behind them. So what you're saying, there's a point that you had said that's related to this, what I'm talking about, is that like as a man with these vulnerability issues, like with not the shame and the guilt about wanting connection, I could see how that like relates even to us. But I mean, like, I know that there's different symbiotic relationships within the way our structure works here with traditional roles and responsibilities. I understand that there's a way that it works and it's about balance and all these types of things. But like, it's just, it made me sad to see that there's nobody behind the men. And I'm wondering, like, their role as a protector, as the provider, supporters, the war chiefs, all these things, like, it's a lot of responsibility. And I could see how that's like harder to find people to connect to when you have so much responsibility on your backs. And I'm sure like even in regular Canadian American society, it's the same way, right? It's like, it's not the same way, but men and women have different roles and men are seen as the providers, as this and all that as well. So I could see how that's still difficult to find that connection, to be able to say like, I'm feeling really angry, but I really just want a hug. Like all these like traditional gender society things don't allow for that to happen. And again, it comes back to vulnerability again, but there's no supports to allow men to have that moment of reprieve. Would that be the right word to use?
Yeah, it's hard. There's like that balance that, I've heard described in the traditional context of, the women caring for the men and the men receiving and caring for the women. And it's, you think about when that balance gets thrown off, it's like those ripples, it like affects everything like you're describing.
Yeah. I would even go as far to say that even women are dysregulated and unbalanced because like I already mentioned that I would feel so much guilt even just for expressing anger.
Yeah.
In a journal where no one's seen it. I literally tore it up and destroyed it because I was like, God forbid anybody see that I was mad. Like, so that right there, we're also not expressing things in a healthy way or like in a way that allows us to process either. So we're suppressing it so much that eventually when we do pop, we're labeled already.
Yeah, the word like disconnect comes to mind, and I'm still with that image that you described, and there's a sense of like how, like this sort of the outer circle, you've moved there from the inner circle, right? I mean, you were obviously once a child and you've moved through all of these things to come to that outside, and I wonder about what has been allowed to stay connected and what hasn't been allowed to stay connected. Like we talk a lot about like inner child work when we're dealing with things that are traumatic, and it's like they're in this sort of posture of the man that I was like talking about, like at the top of something alone. I don't know what, a top of something
on a mountain,
on the top of a mountain,
with the Superman
whatever.
Pose,
That's it. It's like, has there been a loss of contact with the child, and not just the child that you're caring for, but like because it's your child, but your own, your own child that has these same fluctuations of emotion like you're describing. That kid who you're talking about didn't stop having anger, you know?
I'm like, no, he did not. Oh, he's a wonderful 15-year-old now. He's great. But yeah, I'm going back to that image of the circle and all the dynamics. Like with colonialism, of course, they literally took parts away. So taking parts out of that circle is gonna create an imbalance. And residential schools don't exist anymore, but it doesn't mean that we have all those things put back in our circle just yet. So like maybe like if you look at this thing as a whole, it's beautiful. But the second there's a loss now, that's where I was like, It's really sad. Like it's a really, if anyone has a chance to go catch Susie Goodleaf with her multi-generational trauma, go. It's impactful. But yeah, for sure. Like there's all kinds of imbalances everywhere. So how do you connect if there's something missing?
Like hundreds of years, right? Hundreds of years of learning like the opposite of what's natural, you know? And that's not just going to go, it's not just going to go away. Even if you find the right things now, you know, the systems have still been conditioned to work with the absence of what was supportive, you know, and what was right. So it like, I sort of want to come back to what you were saying right at the beginning, like just this, there is something about being sensitized to like, oh, like this is actually okay for me to be feeling, you know, just like any other emotion. It's actually okay, like for this to be here. It's okay for it's a naturally arising, you know, activation in my body, and it doesn't have to be scary, you know. It doesn't have to lead to like the things that I've seen it being led to towards myself or me, even towards other people. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to happen. And yeah, there's some hope in that.
Yeah, and just having space for that openness and like willingness to explore it and see where it's going, rather than that sort of natural inclination I find, I don't know, when there's that tension and that struggle between, you know, these systems and versus our values and the things that we want, and then we have these charged feelings coming up in the middle of that, and it's that drive and that temptation to just run or explode or just not sit and not wait and not even just, I think like investigate maybe is not the right word, just sort of inquire openly, like where, you know, what is this telling me? Where is this feeling leading me? You know, I don't have to be dragged there. Like it's not sort of an ocean riptiding me out. I can just walk down this path and see where it's going.
Yeah. And it's making me think, what you're saying is making me think of the tools that have been put into place. And I don't know, this might be a bit conflictual to say, but, you know, supporting aggression and violence amongst men, you know, putting those things out there as options that are okay for men to do feels like that is the work of the oppressor. You know, it's perfect to keep people down. You know, if the men are being violent and hurting each other and hurting the children and hurting the women, that's like the perfect plan to make this thing not work well. And so there's the sense of that, you know, like it's just so easy to like just want to get into a fight, you know, and because there is some level of this is okay, you know, it's then that's gonna calm that system down. It has that impact, you know. It will actually allow the release, and then you don't have to deal with the with the what's underneath part.
Yeah, you don't have to look.
Have you ever seen that movie Inside Out?
Yeah.
It's such a good movie. It's another recommendation. It's on Disney Plus. Go watch it. Yeah. But like the anger emotion, I love in that movie how that anger is just part of the team of keeping this little girl going. And it's they all balance each other out. They're like, all right, enough. Cue joy, cue sadness, cue. But well, in that movie, sadness is the one that like joy struggles with, right? Because it's anyway, it's a really good movie. But to think of anger as a moving part and what makes us go is such a great way to look at it. So if we think about it in terms like that, and that it's just a part of us that's here, and it's a way to keep things moving, like that oppression or violence and aggression, that it kind of kills that, right? You know, I don't know if I'm explaining this very well.
Yeah, I think it's like, you know, seeing anger not as this thing to expel and explode and just sort of like release upon things, but, you know, allowing yourself to use it as like a force for doing something even more positive. I don't know. I think about like, you know, anger motivating to things at work, or just even like change, like positive, you know,
well,
like
social change comes from strong feelings. So like there's all kinds of good things that come from strong.
And just, yeah, it's like, you know, we're not these robots that are never going to have like that. Like we've all been saying that anger is there for a purpose, you know, whether it's a T-Rex or like an argument or something. I love the image.
I love the T-Rex. Yeah.
But it's
versus a chicken.
Exactly. It's teaching us it serves that purpose, and it's, it's motivating, it's helpful. It's just figuring out, how do we hold space for that in a way that's sustainable?
I think that is the question of the day. That we certainly can't give the one and all answer, right? Like that's
you don't have the solution, Brent. You didn't bring the.
Yeah,
Wasn't it? There's a pill for that. I thought that was the.
There's medication for that.
Something.
But I think we will save that. I'm going to write it down in a second because I can't write and talk at the same time.
Mhm.
But we'll save that for like the next conversation because I think that's a really good place for us to maybe start off with or try to explore a little bit more. Okay. It wasn't that scary, was it?
We survived.
We survived. We survived. I have to admit that like my nervous system was up there.
Mm.
But it's all about survival, right? Like at the gym, what do we say? We say use those nerves, transform them into like what you're doing. Focus. Use those nerves to focus. So I think that's what we did.
I love that.
Okay. Well, thank you both for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And we will end here for today. So Nyawa to the listeners, we will catch you next time. Ana.
The views and opinions of the guests expressed in this podcast do not reflect those of Redeewase and its employees.